The call came into the Ashford County Sheriff's Department at 6:42 in the morning on October 3rd, 1987. A trucker named Del Whitfield had pulled off Route 9 to relieve himself in the tree lane and found two children sitting cross-legged in the dirt, perfectly still, staring at the road like they were waiting for a bus that had stopped running years ago. Their names were Caleb Grayson, age 9, and his sister Mara, age 6. They had been missing for 11 days. Sheriff Tom Odom had led the search himself. Ashford was a small enough county that everyone knew everyone, and the Graysons were well-liked. Bill Grayson ran the feed store, and his wife Ruth taught Sunday school at the Baptist Church on Miller Road. When the kids vanished from their own backyard on a Tuesday afternoon while their mother was hanging laundry, the whole town turned out. Search parties combed the woods behind the property for a mile in every direction. Dogs lost the scent of the creek bed and never picked it up again. After 4 days, the state police brought in helicopters. After a week, most people had stopped saying when we find them and started saying if. So when Odom got the call that they'd turned up alive, sitting calm as churchgoers on the shoulder of a state highway 11 miles from home, he didn't believe it until he saw them with his own eyes. He would tell people later, and only a few people, and only after a few drinks, that the moment he saw them was the moment something in him changed for good. They looked healthy. That was the first strange thing. 11 days with no food, no water, no shelter that anyone could find, and the Grayson children had color in their cheeks. Their clothes were clean or clean enough, no tears, no dirt ground into the knees the way you'd expect from kids who'd supposedly been sleeping outdoors. Mara's hair was combed. Somebody had combed a 6-year-old's hair in the woods. Odom crouched down in front of them on the gravel shoulder, and Caleb looked at him with an expression the sheriff didn't have a word for at the time. He found the word later. It was patience. The boy looked at him the way a teacher looks at a student who's about to ask a question the teacher already knows the answer to. "You're safe now, son," Odom said. "Can you tell me what happened? Where you been?" Caleb glanced down at his sister. Mara hadn't said a word, hadn't cried, hadn't done anything but stare at the asphalt like she was reading something written on it. "We were with the quiet ones," Caleb said. Odom wrote that down because that's what you do. You write down what people say even when it doesn't mean anything yet. He asked who the quiet ones were. Caleb didn't answer. He just smiled, the way kids smile when adults ask a question they've already decided not to explain. They were taken to Ashford General for observation. Bill and Ruth Grayson wept in the hallway, held their children so hard the nurses had to gently pry them apart to run basic tests. Physically, the children were fine. Better than fine, according to Dr. Ellen Marsh, the pediatrician who examined them. Mara, who had been slightly underweight before she disappeared, had actually gained 2 pounds. Caleb's chronic ear infection, the one that had been bothering him since spring, was completely resolved. It was like they'd been at a health resort. Dr. Marsh said in a statement included in the case file, "Not lost in the woods for 11 days in October." Nobody could explain it, and nobody, at first, thought too hard about trying, because the children were home, and that was the miracle everyone had been praying for. It took 3 days for anyone to notice that something had come home with them. Part 2, what the children said. The debriefing interviews were conducted by a state child psychologist named Dr. Priya Ahmed, who had been flown in from the regional office because Ashford County didn't have anyone qualified to interview traumatized children about a possible abduction. The tapes of those interviews still exist, technically, in a sealed evidence box in a county records annex that nobody has requested access to since 1994. Some of what's on them made it into the official report. A lot of it didn't. Caleb did almost all the talking. Mara would occasionally nod or shake her head. But in 6 sessions, she said perhaps 40 words total, and Dr. Ahmed noted in her file that the girl's effect was flat in a manner inconsistent with typical trauma presentation. Not withdrawn or frightened, but disengaged, as though attending to something the interviewer could not perceive. According to Caleb, on the Tuesday they disappeared, he and Mara had been playing in the tree line behind their house, a boundary their mother had told them 100 times not to cross, when Mara wandered further in chasing a rabbit, and Caleb followed to bring her back. That part matched a normal missing child narrative. What came after did not. Caleb said they found a door. Not a house, not a cave, not a shed. A door. standing alone in a small clearing, unattached to any wall or structure, like someone built a room and forgot to build a room. He described it as old wood, gray and swollen with weather, with a black iron handle shaped like a hand missing its last two fingers. Mara had opened it before he could stop her. Caleb's account of what was on the other side changed slightly with each retelling, which Dr. Ahmet noted was consistent with dissociative memory in child trauma victims, except that the core details never wavered, only the elaboration around them. He described a place that was not dark and not light, that had no sky he could remember but also wasn't underground. He described grass that didn't move in the wind because there was no wind. And he described the quiet ones. They don't have faces you can remember, he told Dr. Ahmed in the second session. According to the transcript, you look right at them and you know they have a face. And then you look away and you can't say what it was. But they were nice to us. They gave us food. It tasted like our mom's cooking, except better. Except it wasn't anything. It didn't taste like any specific thing. It just tasted like the idea of being fed. Dr. Ahmet asked what the quiet ones wanted. They wanted to know what it was like to be us, Caleb said. They asked a lot of questions. About feelings. About being scared and being happy and missing someone. They didn't understand missing someone. I tried to explain it and one of them started crying. Except it wasn't really crying. It was just water coming out of where its eyes should be, like it was trying to do the right motion, but didn't know why the motion happened. He said they were never hurt, never threatened. He said the quiet ones combed Mara's hair every morning because they liked how it looked. They said hair like that doesn't grow where they're from. He said the days didn't feel like 11 days. He said they felt like an afternoon that kept almost ending and starting over. Then, in the fourth session, Dr. Ahmet asked a question that changed the entire shape of the case. Caleb, why did they let you go? The transcript notes a pause of 11 seconds. The length is specifically recorded, which itself tells you something about how carefully this tape was reviewed afterward. They didn't let us go, Caleb said. They finished. Finished what, honey? Learning us. Caleb said, you don't keep a book after you've read it. You put it back so somebody else can borrow it too. Dr. Ahmet, per her own notes, felt a chill she described as unprofessional but impossible to suppress, and asked him what he meant by somebody else borrowing them. Caleb looked at his sister. Mara, for the first time in 6 sessions, looked back at him, and something passed between them that the doctor could not name. They're not done with all of us, Caleb said. Just done with me and Mara for now. There's more doors. Part 3. The Grayson House. Ruth Grayson called the sheriff's department on the 16th night after her children came home, at 2:14 in the morning. In a voice Odom said he would never forget, thin and stretched out like a wire pulled too tight. She said Mara was standing in the backyard. Odom drove out himself. He found Ruth on the back porch in her nightgown, not moving, staring into the dark like something had rooted her to the boards. Bill Grayson was already out there, 20 feet from the house, calling his daughter's name in a voice that kept cracking. Mara stood at the edge of the tree line, not running, not hiding, just standing, facing the trees, her small body absolutely still the way it had been when Del Whitfield found her on the highway shoulder. She was 6 years old, and she was standing in a dark backyard at 2 in the morning like she was waiting for a bus. When Bill reached her and grabbed her shoulders, she didn't startle. She turned her head slowly, and according to Bill's statement, given the next morning, hands shaking too badly to hold his coffee cup, his daughter looked at him and said, "It's not time yet. I have to wait for the door." She let him carry her inside without protest. She went back to sleep within the hour, and in the morning she had no memory of leaving her bed. This happened 4 more times over the following month. Sometimes it was Mara. Once it was Caleb. Found not in the yard but 3/4 of a mile down the road, walking with total purpose toward the tree line that bordered Route 9, the same stretch of woods where he'd been found 11 days into the search. Each time, the child had no memory of leaving the house. Each time, they said some version of the same thing when woken or intercepted. "I have to wait for the door. It's not time yet." Bill and Ruth started locking the children's windows, then locking their bedroom doors from the outside, which Ruth wept about doing, but did anyway. It didn't matter. On the 6th incident, Caleb was found standing calmly in the locked bedroom in front of a closed closet door, one small hand resting flat against the wood, as though he were listening to something on the other side of it. The closet had no other exit, nothing behind it but insulation and the outer wall of the house. Bill Grayson opened that closet door himself with his son standing right beside him, and there was nothing there but winter coats and a vacuum cleaner, and Caleb started to cry. The first time, according to Ruth, that either of the children had cried since coming home, and he said, "It was so close. I could hear them starting to open it." Part 4. What the town started noticing. Ashford was small enough that word got around, the way it does in towns like that. Quietly at first, and then not quietly at all. People stopped bringing casseroles to the Grayson house the way they had in the first joyful week after the children were found. They started crossing the street instead. It wasn't just the sleepwalking, though that alone would have been enough to unsettle a town of 2,000 people. It was smaller things that individually meant nothing, and collectively meant something nobody wanted to say out loud. Mrs. Delacroix, who taught Caleb's 4th grade class when he returned to school 3 weeks after being found, reported that he would sometimes stop mid-sentence during a lesson, go completely still for 4 or 5 seconds, and then continue exactly where he left off, as though nothing had happened, except that his classmates said his eyes, during those pauses, weren't looking at anything in the room. The Grayson family dog, a mutt named Scout who had been part of the household for 6 years and had, by every account, adored both children, would no longer go near either of them. He'd back into a corner of the kitchen and growl low in his throat whenever Ma entered the room, a reaction Bill described as nothing like him at all, and eventually the dog was given away to Bill's brother in the next county, ostensibly because Ruth was having trouble managing him, but really, everyone understood, because nobody could stand to watch an animal be afraid of a 6-year-old girl. And there was the matter of the compasses. It started with a Boy Scout troop leader who noticed, almost as a joke at first, that his compass spun uselessly whenever Caleb stood near him during a scouting event the boy attended that November. He mentioned it to a friend, who mentioned it to someone else, and within a few weeks it had become a sort of grim local legend that any compass brought within about 10 feet of either Grayson child would lose true north entirely and simply spin slow and steady, like it was searching for a direction that didn't exist on any map anyone owned. Sheriff Odom tested this himself in early December, using his own service compass, standing in the Grayson living room while Bill and Ruth watched from the kitchen doorway with expressions he described as already knowing what I was about to see and hating that they knew it. The needle turned, not randomly, smoothly, evenly, a slow, continuous rotation, as though it had found something to point at and that something never stopped moving. Part 5, December 19th. The last entry in Sheriff Odom's private notebook regarding the Grayson case, separate from the official file, found among his personal effects years later by his daughter, who eventually donated the notebook to a regional historical society archive along with the rest of his papers, is dated December 19th, 1987, and it is considerably longer than any entry before it. He'd been called out to the Grayson house at just past 11 at night. Both children were missing from their beds. This time, there was no trail through the yard, no clear direction, nothing for the search parties to follow. Bill Grayson had checked on his children at 10:30, as he did every night since October, and both had been asleep in their locked rooms. At 11, Ruth had heard something. She described it in her statement as a sound like a very old door, the kind that needs oil, except it only lasted half a second, like someone opened it and shut it again real quick. And when she went to check, both rooms were empty. The windows were still locked from the inside. The search that followed was smaller than the one in October, quieter, because by then most of the town had privately decided the Grayson children were not, whatever else might be true of them, ordinary lost children who needed finding. But Odom searched anyway, because it was his job, and because whatever unease had settled into him over the previous months hadn't extinguished a part of him that had knelt on a gravel shoulder in October and promised 2 frightened kids they were safe now. He found them at 1 a.m. in the same clearing behind the Grayson property where, according to Caleb's account, the door had first appeared. There was no door there. There never had been, as far as any physical search of that clearing had ever established. No foundation, no hinges, no hardware buried in the dirt. Nothing a team of state investigators combing the area in October had been able to find, despite Caleb's insistence on the exact spot. But Caleb and Mara were sitting there again, cross-legged, exactly the way they'd been sitting on the highway's shoulder 11 weeks earlier, facing an empty patch of air like it was a door about to open. Odom's notebook describes what happened next in handwriting that grows visibly less steady across the page. He called out to them. Neither child responded. He approached slowly, the way you'd approach something that might startle, and when he got close enough to see their faces in his flashlight beam, he stopped because their faces were wrong in a way he could not, even in his private notebook, fully articulate. He used the word rented. He wrote, "Their faces looked rented, like something was wearing them for the evening and would give them back later, a little worn." He said Mara's lips were moving. No sound came out, or almost none. He described it as being at the very bottom edge of hearing, a murmur just below the threshold where a sound becomes a sound instead of pressure in the air. He leaned down to listen, against every instinct telling him not to, and he wrote that what he heard was not English, was not any language, but that somehow he understood the shape of it anyway, the way you understand the shape of a lullaby, even in a tongue you've never learned. He wrote that it felt like counting. He wrote that it felt like something being cataloged. Then, according to the notebook, both children turned their heads toward him at the exact same moment, with the exact same motion, like two puppets on one set of strings, and Caleb spoke in a voice that Odom insisted, for the rest of his life, was not entirely the boy's own. "You're not on the list," Caleb said. "Go home, Sheriff. It's not your door." And then, this is the part of the notebook that his daughter, decades later, would tell an interviewer for a small regional podcast she still refused to fully believe, though she couldn't explain the notebook any other way. Both children stood up, took each other's hand, and walked 3 steps forward into empty air, and were gone. Not ran, not hid, not vanished into the tree lean where a person could, with enough searching, eventually be found. They took 3 steps into a clearing with nothing in front of them, and the space where they had been was simply empty, the way a room is empty after someone has left it and shut the door behind them, except there was no door, no sound, nothing but the cold and the trees, and Sheriff Tom Odom standing alone with his flashlight shaking his hand. Part 6. After. The official file states that Caleb and Mara Grayson were never found. The search was reopened, expanded, ran for months, involved the FBI briefly given the unusual circumstances of the case. No trace of either child was ever recovered. The case remains, technically, open, one of Ashford County's 2 unsolved missing persons cases, filed a shelf away from cheerful paperwork about zoning disputes and county fair permits, as it belonged in the same category of ordinary small-town business. Bill and Ruth Grayson stayed in Ashford for another 6 years before finally selling the house and moving to be near Ruth's sister in another state. Neighbors said Ruth never fully recovered, that she'd sometimes be seen standing at her kitchen window at odd hours, looking toward the tree line, as though checking. Bill, for his part, apparently told a close friend before they left town that he no longer believed his children had been taken from him in October of 1987. He believed they'd been given back, on loan, and that whoever or whatever had loaned them out had simply, eventually, called them back in. Sheriff Odom retired in 1994 and rarely discussed the case, except as noted, after a few drinks, and even then only with people he trusted completely. He kept his old service compass in a drawer in his home office for the rest of his life. His daughter found it among his things after he passed, and she mentioned, in that same regional podcast interview, that out of morbid curiosity she'd taken out to the woods behind her father's old property and tried it herself just to see. She said it worked perfectly, pointed true north, steady as anything, until she reached the edge of the tree lean. Then, for about 4 seconds, the needle spun. She put it back in her pocket and didn't go any further into the woods that day, and she has said on record that she never intends to go back. Somewhere in Ashford County, or somewhere else entirely, somewhere that isn't marked on any map that points to true north, there may still be a door standing alone in a clearing, waiting patiently for whoever is decided is next on the list. If a compass ever spins near you for no reason you can explain, the old story goes, don't ask why, just go home.